The winter of 1956 in Chicago was unforgiving, the kind where breath crystallized in the air and footsteps crunched on snow with a certain finality. Detective Frank Moretti knew the cold intimately, but nothing prepared him for the chill that would settle in his bones on this case. It began with a phone call on December 28. Margaret Grimes' voice trembled on the other end of the line. "My girls," she said, her words catching. "Barbara and Patricia. They went to see that Elvis movie last night. They never came home." Moretti had seen missing persons before. Teenagers especially were prone to flights of rebellion. But something in Margaret's voice, raw terror nestled in maternal instinct, told him this was different. "When did you last see them?" Moretti asked, pen hovering over his notepad. "Yesterday evening around 6. Barbara is 15, Patricia just 13. They were so excited about seeing Love Me Tender. Barbara, she adores Elvis." Margaret's voice cracked on the present tense. "They should have been home by 9:30. The detective jotted down details as Margaret described her daughters: Barbara, taller with dark hair and quiet confidence; Patricia, smaller but spirited, with a dimpled smile. Both wore new Christmas coats, Barbara in gray, Patricia in rust-colored. Did they have money? Friends they might stay with? These were standard questions, but even as he asked them, unease pooled in Moretti's stomach. Just movie money. Everyone knows they would never just not come home. The mother's certainty was absolute. By morning, the disappearance transformed from a routine teenage absence to front-page news. Chicago's papers plastered the girls' school photos across headlines: "Sisters vanish after Elvis movie." The Brighton Theater confirmed they'd attended the 6 p.m. showing. Multiple witnesses reported seeing them there, transfixed by the film. After that, the trail went cold. Detective Moretti stood outside the Brighton, collar turned up against the January wind. He retraced possible routes home, questioned business owners along the path. Most establishments had closed by the time the girls would have walked by. A few late-night spots yielded scattered reports, maybe 2 young girls heading west, maybe not. Memories were imperfect, descriptions vague. "We need more," Moretti told his partner, Jack Dalton, a veteran cop with tired eyes. Someone had to see something. The investigation expanded rapidly. Police checked known offenders in the area, cross-referenced recent similar incidents, and interviewed school friends. The girls were well-liked, neither prone to trouble. Friends described Barbara as Elvis crazy but responsible, Patricia as her devoted shadow. 3 days into the search, a potential lead, a bus driver recalled 2 girls matching their description boarding his westbound route around 9:30 p.m. He couldn't be certain though, it was a busy night, faces blurring in the dim light. "It's something," Dalton offered. "It's nothing," Moretti countered, frustration mounting. "If they got on that bus, where did they get off? Why hasn't anyone seen them since?" The city mobilized. Police resources strained as officers combed neighborhoods, checked abandoned buildings, dragged waterways. Tips flooded in, hundreds by mid-January, each investigated, each leading nowhere. Elvis Presley himself issued a statement urging the girls to contact their mother if they could hear his voice. Moretti kept Margaret Grimes company through the worst nights, watching hope and despair wage war across her features. The other Grimes children, 3 younger, 1 older, moved through the house like ghosts, whispering their sisters' names and prayers. They wouldn't run away, Margaret insisted one evening, hands clutching a mug of untouched coffee. Barbara was saving for Elvis's new record. Patricia had a math test she studied for. They had plans. Moretti nodded, a lump in his throat. 15 years on the force, and children's cases still cut deepest. On January 15, a significant lead, a night watchman at a rail yard claimed to have seen 2 teenage girls matching the Grimes sisters' descriptions with a man in his 20s around 11 p.m. on December 28. The man reportedly had dark hair and wore a Letterman-style jacket. The witness hadn't come forward earlier, thinking it unimportant until seeing a newspaper article. "We need to find this man," Moretti told his captain, hope flickering for the first time in weeks. They interviewed workers at businesses near the rail yard, distributed a sketch based on the watchman's description. Several witnesses recalled seeing a similar man hanging around the Brighton Theatre in previous weeks, sometimes talking to younger girls. The investigation veered toward this unknown figure. Was he a boyfriend one of the girls kept secret? A predator who gained their trust? Records were checked, known offenders investigated. Several men were brought in for questioning. Each denied involvement, each eventually cleared. The breakthrough, if you could call such tragedy a breakthrough, came on January 22, 1957. A construction worker driving along German Church Road in Willow Springs noticed something through the bare winter trees. Two forms, unnaturally still against the snow. Moretti would never forget the scene. The girls lay side by side as if placed there with terrible purpose. Naked, bruised, their bodies preserved by the cold. Barbara and Patricia Grimes had been found, but the discovery only deepened the mystery. The medical examiner determined they had died from exposure, likely within days of their disappearance. But questions multiplied: how did they get there? Why were their clothes missing? The bruising suggested potential violence, yet no definitive evidence of assault could be confirmed given the condition of the bodies. "Someone did this," Moretti insisted to his captain, slamming his fist on the desk. "They didn't walk miles from the city in winter, strip naked, and lie down to die." "We need evidence, Frank," the captain replied wearily. "Not theories." The investigation intensified. Every sex offender in Chicago was scrutinized. Anyone with access to a vehicle and connection to the area became suspect. A skyrocketing number of confessions poured in, most from disturbed attention seekers quickly disproven. One suspect emerged as promising: Edward Bedwell, a 21-year-old drifter with a petty criminal record. Under intense questioning, he confessed to picking up the girls with a friend, taking them to a diner, then to an apartment where he claimed things got out of hand. He described striking the girls, which aligned with some of the bruising found on their bodies. Moretti wasn't convinced. His story doesn't add up. The timeline's wrong. And the diner owner swears they never came in. 2 days later, Bedwell recanted, claiming police coercion. The friend he implicated had a solid alibi. Physical evidence from the apartment showed no trace of the girls. Another lead came when a witness reported seeing the girls in a Chevy with an older man on German Church Road days after their disappearance. This contradicted the medical examiner's timeline, but aligned with another report of the girls being spotted at a bus stop on January 7. Were they alive longer than initially believed? What if the exposure determination is wrong? Moretti asked the medical examiner late one night, poring over autopsy reports. "It's possible," the examiner admitted. "The cold preservation complicates time of death estimates. But I stand by my findings: these girls died from exposure, whether that was the intent or not." Walter Simons entered the investigation next, a middle-aged man known for approaching young girls near the Brighton Theatre. Witnesses placed him near Barbara and Patricia the night they vanished. When questioned, Simons gave conflicting statements about his whereabouts. "I think we've got him," Dalton said after the third interview. "He's hiding something." But what seemed promising crumbled under scrutiny. Simons eventually produced verification of his alibi: he'd been working a night shift, confirmed by multiple coworkers. Another dead end. The case continued to haunt Moretti. In his 25 years with Chicago PD, he'd never encountered a mystery with so many threads leading nowhere. He kept returning to the site where the girls were found, standing in the winter silence, willing the bare trees to speak their secrets. "Someone knows," he would whisper to the cold air. "Someone always knows." Margaret Grimes aged years and months. The press eventually moved on to newer tragedies, but for the Grimes family and the investigators, time stopped that December night. Theories proliferated. Some believed the girls had been held captive in the weeks between disappearance and discovery. Others suggested they'd gone willingly with someone they knew, with things turning deadly later. The timeline discrepancies fed these speculations. Were they alive into January, as some witnesses claimed? A year after the case began, Moretti sat at his desk reviewing the file for the 100th time. The photos of Barbara and Patricia, school portraits contrasting with clinical crime scene images, stared back at him. The case had gone cold, like the girls in the snow. "I think about them every day," Margaret had told him at the one-year memorial. Not just how they died, but who they would have become. Barbara would never attend the Elvis concert she'd saved her allowance for. Patricia would never take the math test she'd studied so hard to prepare for. Their futures stolen by someone who still walked free. The Brighton Theatre eventually stopped showing "Love Me Tender." The bus driver who might have seen them retired. The rail yard where they may have been spotted with a young man was demolished for new development. Physical connections to that night in December eroded with time. But the questions remained, sharp as ever: who took Barbara and Patricia Grimes? Was it someone they knew or a stranger who gained their trust? How did they end up miles from home without their clothes in the dead of winter? Were they alive for days or weeks after their disappearance, as some witnesses suggested? Was their death from exposure intentional or a terrible accident following other crimes? 5 years after the disappearance, Moretti, now approaching retirement, stood once more at the spot where the girls were found. The trees had grown taller, unconcerned with human tragedy. The ground no longer held any trace of that grim discovery. "I'm still looking," he promised the silent woods. "Someone out there knows what happened that night. And someday, someone will talk." The Grimes sisters' case joined the ranks of Chicago's infamous unsolved mysteries, alongside the lipstick killer and the ragged stranger. For those who remembered, it forever changed how parents viewed their children's independence in the city. It remained a cautionary tale whispered from one generation to the next. But for Moretti, it stayed personal, the case that defined and haunted his career. The faces of two young sisters who went to see their idol on screen and never returned home. The mother who answered the door each night hoping for a miracle that never came. The truth that lay just beyond reach, obscured by time, circumstance, and possibly deliberate concealment. Some nights, decades later, in the quiet hours when sleep evaded him, he would still review the mental file: two sisters, an Elvis movie, a cold December night, and the unforgiving snow that eventually revealed what had been taken. The answers were out there somewhere, carried in someone's conscience, waiting to be spoken aloud. Until then, Barbara and Patricia Grimes remained frozen in time, 15 and 13 forever, their final moments known only to the winter and whoever had led them there.